So yeah, I mean, thanks for sort of taking the time and allowing me to speak today. But really, it was just to give you an overview of EO as a business, what we do within that destination charging space, and how we differentiate ourselves from some of our competitors. As Tim said, if you've got any questions throughout, just give me a shout, and I'll keep an eye on the text box as well. But as a background to EO Charging, so we're a British manufacturer of electric vehicle charging stations and the software that powers those charging stations. So Charlie, our CEO, started the business in 2015. We designed and manufactured our first charger and installed it in 2016. Since then, we've manufactured just over 50,000 chargers. The UK and Ireland makes up about 50% of the business, and then we move out into Europe, Asia, Australia, and other emerging markets like India. But the core focus of the business has always been to try and simplify charging and make it as accessible as it possibly can be, but also have those smart features to give you as golf clubs or whoever the customer might be, that flexibility to set different tariffs, etc., and have more control over that infrastructure as to who uses it. And that's gone into the philosophy of sort of making destination charging simple. So right through from the consultation process to understand how much available capacity that you've got on the site and how many chargers you could potentially install today, but also looking into the future and what infrastructure you potentially need longer term to support your members and visitors to the golf clubs. And we've supported a number of different customers. I mean, Tim mentioned Amazon, so we're helping electrify their fleet across the UK and Ireland. We installed 900 chargers last year at 15 depots, and that's going to be in the region of about 3,000 chargers this year. But from a destination perspective, we're helping NCP car parks in terms of the rollout of electric charging infrastructure across their sites across the UK, LNER, and Coventry City Council and Suffolk County Council. So we've got a very diverse range of customers, and that's really helped to build out our overall proposition. But really, it's to add to that destination experience. And as Tim said, around those sort of green goals and agendas for businesses in making that switch to more renewables and a more green way of working, is something that you really want to shout about. If you have got chargers on site, that's going to be a draw for a lot of drivers and members that do drive electric vehicles, and make that golf club a destination as well as a golf club. So making that sort of destination experience and signage on arrival is really important. And we can look, we're working with Scott and the team to look at innovative ways that we can differentiate that between your usual sort of signage that you'd see at destination chargers and make it really unique for you guys. But the main element, or the thing that ties it all together, is what we call our EO Cloud, which is our software that manages the charge points. So from your perspective, you'll have complete control over that infrastructure in terms of who uses it, what the prices are, how you want to bill visitors for the use of that infrastructure, and then flexibility to give, I don't know, VIP members free access to that charging infrastructure potentially. So you've got all of that control within the back office system. And that infrastructure can either be accessed via an app, which is free to download. So a driver would visit the site, download the app, punch in their credit card details, and then scan the charger to start the session. Or for more regular members, you can give them an RFID card, so they can just arrive on site, plug the vehicle in, and tap the front of the charge point to start the charging session. And that central software platform will manage both AC chargers, which will be the main focus for golf clubs, and that's a slightly slower rate of charge. So you'd be plugging in for 3, 4, maybe 5 hours to top the vehicle up. But it'll also support DC charging, which is the high rate charging that you'll see at motorway service stations, etc. So if there ever was a need for DC charging longer term, or it's something that you potentially want to look at, we can offer that alongside of our AC chargers as well. But from a management perspective, you've got the ability to monitor and manage all of those charging sessions and even multiple sites from one central platform. So you can look at the live status of individual chargers. You've got the ability to disable a charge point if you wanted to potentially reserve it for for someone who was arriving on site in the next hour or so. You've got full flexibility to set the pricing either by time or for the energy that the driver's using, or you can do those simultaneously. So if you were concerned about someone hogging a charge point for 7 hours or whatever it might be, you could potentially charge them for their energy initially, and then once it rolls past the 5-hour point, you'd also charge them a premium for the use of that car parking space. And really that just gives you a bit more control over how quickly you can get people to move on after they've had their charging session. And you've got the ability to set different tariffs as well. So if you wanted to give free access, as I say, to members and include that as part of their membership, and then charge visitors for the use, you've got the ability to do that. As I say, from a driver's perspective, there's two routes for authentication. So it's either download the app and set up an account, and that will show all of the different golf clubs registered on that network across the UK. So it's essentially like a sort of golf network, for want of a better word. But when a driver arrives on site, there'll be a QR code on the side of the charger, or you can search the location and that will bring up the camera. You scan that code on the side of the charger, that will come up with the cost for the charging session and then allow you to start. Or, as I say, via an RFID, you can just tap the front of the charger and that will bill you accordingly for the charging session. So it's a really simplistic way of allowing people to access that charging infrastructure, and it's open and accessible to all. The other element is you can restrict that network as well. So if you said, well, actually, we don't want to become a public charging hub for whoever is driving past, we only want this infrastructure to be available for our members, you've got the ability to restrict access. So you can just register individual members onto the platform, so that you know that you've only got a select few that are able to use that infrastructure on site. With regard to our chargers versus some of our competitors, as Tim said, around scalability and looking into the future as to what you'd need today, but also 5-10 years down the line, that's very much how we've designed our chargers, with that side of things in mind. So the charger on its own, which we call our EO Genius, is just a plug, essentially. It's what we call a dumb charger. So if you just installed that charge point on its own, it would deliver a charge to a vehicle, but you wouldn't have any control over that unit. It would just be delivering power to that vehicle. Whereas a lot of our competitors, you'll have a smart charger, which is one contained unit. You connect it to the internet either via a SIM card or a hardwire into the internet on site, and that would give you control over the units. The difference with our system, as I say, we've got what we call a hub, which is a central brain, which is installed within the building, and we can then connect up to 32 chargers to that hub. The benefit of that is it's a lot more cost effective than some of our competitors. So if we were looking at one smart charger, it would be in the region of about £900 to £1,200 for that smart charger. Whereas one of our EO Genius units is in the region of about £695, and a hub is about £450. So comparative, if we're looking at one charger and one charger and one hub, but as you start to add chargers onto that system, there's a £450 saving for every charger that you then add to that system. The other benefit of having that brain centrally in the building is we can load manage. So if you've got a site where you're a bit restricted in terms of the available power that you've got, that hub will read that incoming power feed to the building, look at what's available while you're using the aircon units, fridges, whatever it might be, and distribute that final amount of power out to the chargers. So what that allows us to do is not look at costly upgrades to the power supply on site or bringing on new power supplies to support this infrastructure. We can manage with the power that you've got on site, and prioritise the building in that process as well. I think we just got a question here. Bring that up quickly. So the question is, Ryan, I've heard a couple of people talking about introducing charging points and calling into question whether the UK's power networks can cope with the level of charging that would be required if the government targets RE electric vehicles are able to meet. Is there an issue here? No, so that's where that load management becomes really important. So there's definitely got to be investments into support for the grid via renewables, wind turbines, solar generation, etc. But that's where that load management starts to become really important. For the majority of drivers, they'll arrive on site likely with 40, 50% charge. They don't need to fully charge the battery to then either go home or on to the next stop. It's more about just topping that battery up to allow them to continue on to the next part of their journey. So that's where that load management and making sure that we're managing the available power on site is really important. And during our sort of consultation process at the beginning, we'll get a better understanding of what your energy usage on site is and what your actual power supply is, to look at actually, is load management feasible, or would it reduce the charge rate to such a point that it wouldn't be manageable? And then we need to look at innovative ways that we can get around that, either upgrading the main fuse if that's a route, potentially upgrading the supply, or potentially looking at things like renewables to support that. But at these early stages, not so much of an issue. It's more on the local DNOs, etc., to start to bolster that network so that we've got enough available supply coming through. But there's well enough currently. Longer term, it will become an issue, but that's already in the process to cover a lot of those issues. But as I say, load management is really the key element currently. So so moving back to that hub, so as I say, centrally within the building, and it just really makes for a really cost-effective and scalable route in terms of how we can install infrastructure longer term. So the hardware and software is one element to it. So we design and manufacture that all in the UK, up in Stowmarket in Suffolk is where our factory is. But that whole turnkey service side of things around the installation, the design, the consultation, and the ongoing management of those charge points is the other element that we really push ahead in comparison to some of our competitors. So right from the design perspective, if potentially sometimes it's more cost effective to maybe rejig car parks slightly to make the installation of chargers more cost effective, we can carry out all of that process and give you a few options to say, well, if we did this, there'd be a marked decrease in terms of the overall cost of installing the infrastructure. So really there to consult with you and look at what the best solution is. From an installation perspective, we've got a UK-wide network of what we call EO Academy approved installers. So we run an academy to train up installers so they know the ins and outs of installing our equipment, and they can carry out all elements of installation. So whether it be high voltage, low voltage, the commissioning and handover of our chargers, we can cover all of that within our turnkey offering. I think we just got another question. So the question is, if we decided to install the AC system, would that suffice for some of our members who are driving 70 odd miles from London to Deal, or would that need to be more like a DC system? So a golf round is 6 hours in total. Would that be enough charge to get them back home? So to answer that question, if we're looking at a DC charger, just get my calculator out. So if we're looking at an AC charger, a 7 kilowatt, for instance, that will give you roughly 25 miles of charge per hour of charge. So if we look at, say, 6 hours times by 25, that would give them 150 miles to drive back home. So that would be more than sufficient to support those drivers. It does depend on the vehicle as well. So we do have on the AC charging side of things, the most common is a 7 kilowatt, which, as I say, will give you 25 miles of charge per hour of charge. And that's the most common charging capacity in terms of vehicles. We can install 22 kilowatt AC chargers, which come off of a 3-phase power supply, and they obviously use a lot more power, but they will charge a vehicle roughly 80 miles of charge per hour of charge, but that is dependent on the vehicle. So there's not many vehicles that will charge at that rate. So stuff like Teslas, Audi e-trons will charge at that higher rate. But even if you were driving a vehicle that would only charge at 7, you could still plug in that higher rated charger. It will just draw a lower charge. But yeah, that sort of dwell time on site will give you well enough to charge the vehicle up. And then from an ongoing maintenance perspective, so that infrastructure starts to become quite important. If you've got a driver that's driven, as you said, 70 miles to your golf club, if they don't have the charger available on site, it's really key that we make sure that they're well maintained and there's a service level agreement in place to make sure that we're supporting from that perspective. So we've got a range of different service levels, depending on what your requirements are, ranging from a 72-hour SLA, on-site SLA, or 24 hours. For customers like Amazon, for instance, we've even got service level agreements of 1.5 hours on site. They're obviously a little bit more costly. For them, it's really important because that's sort of mission critical infrastructure. And if the vehicles aren't charged, they're not able to go out and do their day's work. But we've got a range of different service levels depending on what your requirements are. And we've got 24-hour call center. So if drivers have got any issues or they're there a little bit later and they can't disconnect the vehicle, for instance, we've got a call center there to support. Just bringing up another chat. So how are the different types of plugs catered for? So good question. It's very similar to a USB. So for instance, if you had a Samsung phone or you had an iPhone, the USB end that plugs into the plug or the computer is the same. It's just the connection on the phone end is different, and that's very similar to electric vehicles. So for sites like golf clubs or destination chargers, we'll always suggest that we install a socketed charger, and then the driver will bring the cable that's with the vehicle. So they're universal at that socket end. It's just the other end that's different. And as I say, all vehicles now, I say all vehicles, the majority of vehicles will come with a cable, and if they don't, the majority of drivers will purchase a cable, because otherwise you've got no real use of public charging infrastructure. But as I say, it's universal, and we're starting to see a bit more of a shift towards a unified plug type. So a lot more manufacturers are now moving across to what we call a type 2 connection, which was originally mainly used by European vehicle manufacturers. But yeah, we can cater all different plug types. And then, as I say, from a driver support perspective, we've got a 24-hour call centre, and that's supported by a company called Foster's, which do our on-site maintenance. But also we've partnered up with the AA, so we've trained up part of their team, and they've got access to our back office software, and they've got the ability to monitor those charging units. And if there is an issue, there's a fault with the vehicle, whatever it might be, we've got the ability to remotely fix that. And if we can't remotely fix it, that's when a ticket's raised, and we get an engineer to site to fix that fault. But as I say, I mean, across the board, across the 50,000 chargers that we've manufactured, our failure rate's less than 1%. So it doesn't happen often, and the chargers are extremely reliable. But if it does happen in those small circumstances, then we've got service level agreements in place to support that. We've got another chat here. What would be the estimated cost for an installation of 3 AC chargers, and what would be the estimated annual cost to run those chargers? So the costs can vary quite dramatically. So if we were looking at a fairly simplistic installation, say 2 chargers on a wall, and the cable run was about 15 meters, for instance, and yeah, 2 parking bays near a wall, in the region of about £4,000, roughly speaking. If we're starting to look at groundworks, longer cable runs, then the costs can start to increase from there. But that's the element that we'll always try and look at how can we install these in the most cost-effective way possible. In terms of estimated annual costs, let's say, for instance, you had to start off with 3 charging sessions a week that ran for 3 hours each. So 7.2 times by 3 times by 3 times by, call it 52, times by 0.15 equals, it's about £500 for 3 charging units doing 3 sessions a week. That utilization will obviously start to increase longer term, but obviously when you're charging the users for access to that infrastructure, you can then add a margin onto that. So you're paying for the administration of those, well, paying for that, but also earning a slight markup in terms of the energy that you're selling back to drivers. And we've got another question as well. Would clubs be allowed to install their own charging points once they have purchased them? So if you purchase the chargers from us and then want to install them yourselves, we could potentially look at that. We would need the whoever the contractor is that's looking to install would need to be EO Academy trained, and they'd need to have done either a City and Guilds or an NIC, EIC course in installing EV chargers. But our EO Academy is free of charge, so it's internet, it's on the internet. So we can onboard any contractors that you might already have onto that and train them up. It's only the NIC, EIC or City and Guilds that has a cost attached to it. From a purchase perspective, we've obviously got, here's your invoice and the total cost for the infrastructure, but we've also got a funded solution. So that can be up to 10 years. So if you wanted to look at rolling in that infrastructure, the installation, the ongoing service level agreements, the software fees, etc., all into one monthly payment, we can do that. And that's something that we'll provide alongside of our sort of standard quotation. So they're things that we can start to investigate as well to make that purchase a little bit easier over a longer period of time. Sorry, so we've got another question. So I was told that you need to have a 3-phase power supply into the club. How does that work? So you don't necessarily need to have a 3-phase power supply. So the 7.2 kilowatt 32 amp chargers, they operate off of a single phase supply. If you wanted to move up to 22 kilowatt 3-phase chargers, then you would need a 3-phase power supply. But those 7 kilowatt, which is really the mainstay for a lot of longer dwell time destination chargers, then you would only need a single phase supply for that. And then we've got one other question. What grants are available to support the installation costs? So at the moment, the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, so OZEV, they offer it was originally called the Workplace Charging Grant, but that's now been opened up to destinations, B&Bs, etc. And that's £350 per charger installed, and that you can get up to 40 chargers and get £350 off of 40 chargers. So you can range, and it depends on how many you want to install, but it's £350 per individual charger. And that can be segmented as well. So if the grant carries on and you install 3 chargers this year and you want to install another 3 chargers in 2 years' time, and that grant's still available, you can access that multiple times. You don't have to do all of those charges in one block. We've got another question. Would you suggest AC or DC rapid chargers, and what is the cost difference, pros and cons? So very much depends on the application, but for if you're looking at dwell times of 6 hours, etc., then AC makes the most sense. DC rapid chargers are pretty expensive. So a 50 kilowatt DC charger from a company called Tritium, for instance, would be in the region of about £25,000. So yeah, in these sort of scenarios, AC would make the most sense. And then branching on to another question, generally most golf clubs would have a 3 to 4 hour charging time. Would this need a 22 kilowatt to achieve? No, again, I mean, even if you're looking at 3 hours, that would still be 75 miles of charge that you'd get from a 7 kilowatt charger, which would be more than enough for the majority of people to move on to their next destination. The 22 kilowatt charger, if you've got enough available supply and a 3-phase charger on a 3-phase power supply on site, we'd always look to install a 22 kilowatt charger if we can, but it is dependent on the vehicle. So for the majority of vehicles, they'll only charge at 7 kilowatt. You've got some more premium brands like Audi, Tesla, etc., that will charge at that higher rate, but it's dependent on what the vehicle can take as opposed to what chargers on site. And then another question, would the claiming of the grant be managed by yourselves as part of the installation, or would we do that independently? So that's all managed by us. All it is a short form that you need to fill out. You send that off to OZEV. It's all done online, and they'll send back basically like a voucher code, and then we'll process that, and it's a contribution towards the invoice. So you'll see the total amount for the invoice, and then that's subtracted off that total amount. And then one other question, is there an annual license fee for the software? There is. It's £50 per charger per annum. So we've tried to keep that as low as we possibly can. And then what kind of profit could be gained from a charger after cost of electric, excluding install? I'll send you across afterwards. So I'll send that to Scott and he can, or Tim, and they can share it afterwards. But we've got a really good sort of business case document which explains, here's your average cost of energy. If you were having 3 or 4 charging sessions a week, this is the likely profit that you'd earn over the cost of a year. So we'll send that across afterwards for you to have a look through. But that's the end of my bit. Is there any other questions before we move on? And I'll hand back to Tim. So question from Jan, is the hub essential? It is for the smart features. So if you wanted to install chargers and just allow users to use it and not charge them for the use of the infrastructure, then we could just install the Genius chargers on their own without the hub. The hub becomes important if we want to have that control and the ability to charge people for the use of the infrastructure.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm sure I've just seen there's another question pop in. I'll let you take
Is there a straightforward way to find out our incoming capacity to the club? That's another thing that I think we'll share, because we've got like a remote site survey form, which is pretty straightforward, and that will give you an idea of your incoming capacity. And then we can start to look at maybe getting half-hourly meter data either through GMG or whoever your energy provider is. And then, yeah, we can start to get an idea of what your usage is longer term. In terms of reference customers, yeah, we have got sports clubs, so we've done a number in the past, which I can send across. And then final one, what is the cost of the software setup? So that's £50 per annum for us to install it and commission it and get it all online. That's included within the cost. But yeah, £50 per annum for the software side of things.
Thank you. I think I should say that what we'll do from a GMG perspective is we'll pop a follow-up email over to you all after this, because if you're anything like me, I'm sure there will be questions that you wish you had you'd have thought of at the time. So I'm going to hand over to Tom now, and I've just got to find him in the chat room. So Tom, we've actually been working with Tom for quite a while now, actually, before any of us even knew what COVID-19 was. And I'm sure we're all familiar with solar energy, but for us in this particular, with reference to Cactus Energy in particular, we really wanted something that was adaptable for golf clubs, because I think there's a lot of common misconceptions within the industry, and I'm sure Tom will be able to clear everything up today. So Tom, over to you. I'll just unmute. Can't hear you, Tom.
You can hear me now. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can. Great. Thumbs up. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name's Tom Schofield. I'm from a company called Cactus Energy. We've been operating in the commercial and residential solar market for around 2.5, 3 years or so now. Previously, I've got an awful lot of experience in sort of solar farms, but predominantly commercial and residential solar installations, which work very well alongside what Ryan's just been through. Alongside EV charging. Great option if you can charge those vehicles from a source of renewable power such as solar energy, then all the better, and we're doing a hell of a lot more for the climate, aren't we? So essentially what I'm going to take you through is a full breakdown of a system that it's a made up system. I've called it the Bonnie Links. I hope there's not a golf course in Scotland called the Bonnie Links. There could well be. But I've given you some sort of indicative figures of how a system may well look for your club. So there are various different ways in which solar can be implemented into a golf club. There's all types of roofs. Obviously, greenkeeper sheds can be an option. Obviously, clubs a lot of the time are maybe quite old, established a long time ago. Some are a little bit different to that. So essentially, this is a bit of an overview of how the financial elements of this will all stack up. It's a pretty sort of standard size system that you'd be looking at. But when it comes to solar, each system is always different. So we have to take absolutely everything case by case. And essentially what I'm going to take you through is how we go about doing that. And then I'm more than happy to field any questions that you guys have. So essentially, this is a report that we would send out to one of our clients once we've received any specific data which is going to be relevant. So for instance, half-hourly data or your electricity bills. What we do is we analyze that data. We go through what you're using and when you're using it. So obviously the last year has probably been a little bit different for everybody. So we try and sort of base it on an average 12-month system to give you exactly what your returns are going to be. So in this instance, we've got a club here, which, as I say, it's based up in Scotland. The reason we've used a system up in Scotland is purely because there is a common misconception that potentially you have to be way down south, right on the bottom of the coast there, in order to be able to make any money. But that may well have been true years and years ago, but unfortunately, it's not the case anymore. Well, fortunately, it's not the case anymore because we're in a position where now the systems themselves are very good in terms of what they can produce. The panel efficiency has increased massively over the years, essentially meaning that anywhere you are in the country, we can put together what will hopefully be some good numbers for the club to be able to utilize renewable energy. So a system cost of 45 kilowatts, or a system size of 45 kilowatts is going to cost somewhere in the region of around £35,000 plus VAT. 45 kilowatt system is going to be somewhere in the region of around 120 panels. You get a single inverter. So on this one, what we've done is we've analyzed this specific club's usage. Now, over the year, it means that the club are going to be able to offset just over a quarter of their total bills. Now, that obviously is going to rise as we get further and further into the electrification of the grid. You're going to have, with what Ryan's bringing to the table, even more sort of demand on your electricity usage. And therefore, it gives us the ability to offset any more or much more in the way of electricity should you be able to generate it from solar power. So we know that when we put these systems together, we've already analysed what your current usage is. The club obviously will always be able to give us an indication of what their plans are moving forward. If, for instance, your Toro workman at the club in the greenkeeper shed is then going to become an electric, or there is going to be additional, perhaps, irrigation services, more and more electric vehicles coming to the front, then we're in a position where we can sort of analyse that future data moving forward and hopefully size a system around what we believe is going to be sort of most efficient for the club. It used to be years ago that you would be in a position where you would cover all of the roof space that you possibly could to be able to take advantage of the feed-in tariff. The feed-in tariff is no longer available, so it's more about tailoring a system around what the club's usage is going to be. So if we have a look at it and we understand that, right, you're using 100,000 kilowatt hours a year as a very simple explanation, and we were to offset 50% of that with a 50 kilowatt system on your roof, then it's going to halve your electricity usage, or it's certainly going to halve what you're buying from the grid as well. So we take into account various different factors, a lot of it being what you're using, how much you're currently paying for your electricity, and then we present you with an idea of what we believe is going to be an accurate representation of what a solar panel system can do for you. We're very much focused on the climate. We want to know what this system is going to be able to do for any individual club. We calculate that down massively, and we try and sort of make it a little bit more digestible, because it's very easy to sort of say, listen, you're going to be able to offset, 8.8 tons as we got down here. But what does that actually mean? So the equivalence there, as you can see, you've got around 22,000 on this specific club, offsetting 22,000 miles of an average passenger vehicle a year, 3 tons worth of landfill, and over 1 million smartphones charged. So there's an awful lot in the way of offsetting that we can do. We can also relate that to specifics in the club. So whether or not it's taking your mule off the club for, I don't know, a month, 2 months, 4 or 5 years, it could be. So there's a lot in which we can do to sort of calculate it and help you have an idea about what this system is actually doing for you from a climate perspective. There's also a few other bits that we do on top of that as well. But I think more importantly for the clubs at this stage is probably going to be the financial results. So a system of that size, not forgetting based up in Scotland, it's going to have a payback period of around 6.2 years. So if you are lucky enough to maybe be a little bit further south, those numbers might look even better for you as well. But as I said earlier on, it's very much a case-by-case scenario that we have to take it on. We have to analyze each club's bills and see where we get to. So it's about an 18% ROI. You're going to be saving in excess of £5,000 a year. And then the reason we've put the number in there of over a 25-year period is because the panels themselves these days, they come with a 25-year panel performance guarantee. So essentially that's going to mean that a club can safely put a system onto the roof and know that you're going to be guaranteed these types of returns over that period of time. I'll get on to a little bit more about the monitoring and how we operate these systems moving forward, because obviously clubs would worry about, well, what happens in 5 years or 10 years, and I'll take you through that shortly as well. So essentially what's included in what it is that we're offering. So this is a full turnkey project. The price that we put together for you as a club is absolutely everything included, everything that's been considered. So it's a full design of the system based on your electricity usage. We have a full site assessment to be able to understand the structural integrity, the electrical infrastructure, which Ryan touched on before. So on your behalf, we make an application to the electricity grid. We understand exactly what is going to be possible to install. So if we decide that in this scenario, we've got a 45 kilowatt system that we want to put on your roof, we have to understand that the existing grid infrastructure is going to be able to take that. So we have to make an application to the grid, which can take somewhere in the region of around 45 working days. So it gives you plenty of time. So as soon as we start this project, we can make the application. There is no sort of obligation for you to move forward, but it does give you the ability over that period of time to start having chats with the powers that be and the members of the club that are going to be able to make these decisions. Similar to that, you've got planning applications. Now the planning applications, again, can take somewhere in the region of around 2 months. So when we submit that, we're obviously submitting full designs of the system, what it is that we're proposing, the types of equipment that we're going to be using. And again, as I say, it's about a 2-month turnaround on that as well. So it gives the board at the club significant time to be able to discuss whether this is a project for you or not. What it essentially does for us is gets us a little bit ahead of the game. So when the time comes to making that decision, we're able to sort of pull the trigger and get the install moving. So there are various different roof types in which can be considered. So you may well have a flat roof. It could be a pitched roof. It could be the greenkeeper sheds. There's an awful lot of differences in terms of a club's individual structure that they have, specifically the electrical infrastructure as well, whether there be ducting from potentially a driving range, or there's a certain element. It could be the hut at the 9th and you want to be able to power that, keep the fridges on comp day on a Saturday and make sure that you're serving cold beer. And if you can do that via renewable energy, then all the better. So we're pretty adaptable when it comes to being able to understand exactly what it is that the club's needs are, and then hopefully developing a system that's going to work best for you. So included in all of this as well is obviously a structural assessment. We have to go through full risk assessments as well. We're including scaffolding if it's going to be required. Absolutely everything's going to be totally covered in the full cost that we put forward to you. And you'll receive a document that's going to be similar to this, also a supporting document that's much more technical in what the breakdowns are going to be. So the technical minded guys can really dive into it. And it's all based on irradiation levels in your specific area against weather patterns over the past sort of 20 years or so. So we know that the numbers that we're putting together for you are going to be very solid. And obviously that's going to throw up quite a few questions, but we do have the data to back that up. We've got many clients under our belt at the moment that we continuously monitor. We monitor via a remote system that we have here, and we provide monthly monitoring reports to ensure that what we've put forward to you is actually doing what it is that we said we could. Now, that wasn't something that was available in years gone by, but over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, the monitoring element of these systems has increased to a level that means, you know, there is no hiding from what the system should be doing. And obviously there's full commissioning and obviously fully certified on the back end of these systems as well. So the monitoring itself is very in depth. We can understand exactly what you're monitoring day by day. So right now I'm in Manchester, the sun's shining. We know that our systems are going to be working to a very good standard today, but these systems that we're putting together, it's not going to be quite the same maybe in the depths of winter. So we know that the numbers we're putting forward have to be taken on a 12-month average. So yes, you're going to do a lot better in the summer because there are more daylight hours, and in the winter, obviously, there's going to be less generation. However, the bulk of the golf club's usage is going to be during the summer. So let's say that I was rocking up to my local golf club with my electric car. I'm going to go plug it into an EO charge point. I know it's going to take me around 4 hours to charge my vehicle. I know it's going to take me 3.5 hours to have a round of golf and then a sandwich afterwards. So if I can get up there, understanding that I can plug my car in, the club can charge me whatever they wish to over that 4-hour period of time, knowing that I've charged my car via renewable energy, get back into it with a full tank, I'm going to be quite pleased because it means that I'm taking that away from my energy usage at my home as well. So it's a very adaptable system that we can put together for you. And I think, as Ryan touched on earlier on, there are various different elements that need to go into it. You do need to consider the types of vehicles that clients or the members are going to have at the club. And we're quite adaptable in doing that as well. And there's various different systems that we can put in to allow you to be able to do that. I think one of the more important things that we're to Cactus anyway as an operation is the fact that we are, and all of our installations are fully offset. So we're not just planting trees out in Thailand for the system to offset the emissions that it's taken for you to actually get the kit to site and get the full installation taken care of. We're planting trees in the UK. And I know that planting trees isn't probably everybody's cup of tea, but it's very difficult to sort of offset renewable installations that we're doing anyway. So any individual club will have, based on a sliding scale of the amount of energy that you've had installed, a number of trees planted in. It'll give you sort of GPS location as to what you've done there, what trees you've planted, where they are, and it's a little something that you can show off to your members and any visitors or societies that might come to the club. So that's very much a brief overview of what we put together for a club. As I say, there are many different supporting documents that go along with it, which sort of culminates in an extremely technical breakdown. And in order to be able to put that together, it's a case of hoping that you guys are going to be able to send through significant energy data, which is usually provided to us by GMG, which works extremely well for us. And we know that the numbers that we put together are going to be extremely solid. So we've got quite a few clubs and quite a few sports clubs, commercial entities under our belt at the moment. We're more than happy for you to have any discussions with those. And yeah, I think that's sort of a brief overview of the financials that you can tend to expect. So if there are any questions at all, I'd be more than happy to answer any.
I think, Tom, thank you for that. I think we've got a few questions in the chat box, if you can see that.
I can't see that.
Okay, I'll read them out to you. So we had Chris, what is the VAT rate as partially exempt businesses? This is important.
It is. It's very important, and it's very similar to the elements of grants that are going to be available. So in a lot of cases, it's going to be 20%. In some cases, it could be 5%. It depends on where you are as a club. So when we take on the initial assessments of what we're going to be looking at, then we start to look at local grant availability and obviously what the rate of VAT is going to be. But obviously, worst case scenario, you're going to be looking at 20%. Depends on how the club's set up as a business as well.
Okay. And then how large is one panel in your example?
So one panel is about 1 meter by 1.7.
And then we've got why only one inverter and not an inverter per panel?
Well, yeah, that's an option. On this system, it's pretty exposed. Now, there's various different issues with golf clubs that we have to take on. There could be an awful lot of shading in there. If there's a lot of shading in there, then we would be considering an individual inverter optimizer per panel, which would usually be a solar edge system. So if we feel that there's going to be significant shading, or it's perhaps a system that's closer to Manchester where we see a lot more cloud than various other areas, then yeah, we'd consider a solar edge system.
Okay. And are grants available for commercial installations?
There are. And again, as I touched on earlier, there are a lot of different grants in different areas. It's down to the local council. So if you give us a project that we want to have a look at, we will then be able to go and approach that local council and find out what's available for you in your specific area.
And related to that, do you advocate battery storage as well, given that lighting is used in winter for tennis clubs?
Yeah, absolutely. That falls under the banner of, making sure that we are analysing each individual project. So, if, for instance, let's say that it's a beautiful day today, you are able to charge potentially some batteries on site. You could then also drain that battery and charge any potential electric vehicle, or maybe the club's buggies overnight. I mean, it has to be taken case by case. If it's something that you want to consider, for instance, we've recently done a club that's looking at getting a 25 kilowatt battery installed because they want to offset as much energy as they possibly can do because they want to be carbon neutral. And in order to be able to do that, obviously, if they're charging their buggies overnight, they're going to be drawing electricity from the grid. But it would be great if they could charge it from the batteries that they've been charging all day long. If, for instance, there's people outside having a drink after and there's not that much usage within the actual clubhouse. So we have to be very in depth in our analysis of what the energy usage is and what the actual drivers are for every individual club.
Okay. And then there was a concern over theft, how secure the panels are.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty heavy. I wouldn't want to be going up there trying to take a panel off a roof, but they're fixed on. These things are going to be lifted and they're going to be based underneath tiles. I mean, if you were to actually, fair play, if someone wants to try and steal them, go for it. It will not be recommended. That's a pretty dangerous thing to be taking on, electrics and going under roofs to take it off. But no, I mean, I've been in this industry for 10 years. I've never heard of a solar panel system be stolen. And I think that would probably be a question better answered when we go into the nitty gritty of how it's actually going to be fixed to an individual roof. And in all honesty, a lot of the costs here aren't necessarily about the kit. It's obviously the inverters are very expensive, which would be typically housed within the clubhouse. The panels on the roof, it'd be like stealing the tiles off the roof. There's not going to be a lot of resale value because it's an individual system that isn't registered. All these systems have to be registered specifically with an individual MPAN number against the data sheets of that individual panel as well. So I've never heard of a solar panel system be stolen.
Okay. And then what are the costs associated with the initial feasibility study?
So the initial feasibility study is free. We do that on behalf of GMG. That's something that we've worked in for GMG customers. We're in a position where we have an agreement with GMG that we will analyze all of these clubs completely free of charge to be able to give you a full and transparent breakdown of what it is that you could well be embarking on if you were to adopt solar.
Okay, and then we've got just two more. We have a circa 200 square meter a single-story clubhouse with a large south-facing roof in the southeast. Could this system generate enough electricity to provide electric heating between October and April?
Potentially. Like I say, we would have to see your electricity bills and we'd have to analyze them first of all. But yeah, there is an option for that. It may well include battery storage. It may well include adding a heat pump to the system as well. They work very well together. Obviously, those are the sort of months where the generation isn't going to be quite as high, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to be generating anything at all. So it depends on what your heating usage is. We'd have to look at the size of the building, the size of the rooms, the size of the areas that you want to specifically heat and how you're going to be heating them. And then we'd be able to put forward a system for you that's going to be most suitable to heat that property.
And then final one, what is the smallest amount of panels that is worth installing?
Any amount of panels is worth installing. It's about the driver for the club. I mentioned earlier on, we've got a club who is looking for just putting panels onto their hut at the 9th or the 10th hole, purely just to power fridges and keep electricity on so that they can take card payments. On there, we're putting 6 panels on. If it's worth it for the club to offset some emissions, and it's also worth it to be able to get power to that hut because there isn't a ducting line that goes directly back to the club, then I would say in that scenario, it's absolutely worth it.
Okay. We've had a couple more come through. Do you also assess the integrity of a clubhouse roof in being able to handle the panels?
Yeah, and that's extremely important. So when a system in principle has been agreed, we take a deposit, but it's a refundable deposit. It's a refundable deposit against the structural integrity when we go down and actually conduct a structural engineer's report. It's also refundable against the grid, allowing us to be able to hook up, and obviously refundable against the planning application as well.
And then the last question, I'll field this one. Helen has asked if the free of charge feasibility study extends to LTA tennis clubs, which it does. So yeah, I think that's everything, unless there's any more questions from anyone else that they want to pop into the chat box. Tom, I'd like to say thank you very much. Obviously, as I've said to everyone, we will be following up with everyone after this webinar, but we do also understand that we're in the midst of the summer now. So, and a lot of these projects are going to be long-term projects for many of you in the room. So we will be in touch a little later in the year as well, as we understand that it may not be something that you're going to action this very second. But yeah, I'd like to say thank you to Tom and to Ryan for presenting today. Thank you for everyone who has joined in the call. We have had one final question just pop up from Phil, which I'll field to you, Tom. Do you have a rough cost of a 25 kilowatt battery store?
Just the battery? It's very difficult to understand and give you a cost without actually seeing what that battery is going to be required for.
Okay. Maybe one for us to follow up with Phil afterwards.
Anything like this, if you've got any questions like that at all, it is very much based around your existing data. And if you give us an idea of what it is that you're looking for, feel free to just fire that data straight through to Tim or your GMG rep, and we'll gladly put a project together for you. I'd rather not give you a number that may not well be accurate and get your hopes up.
Perfect. Right, thank you everyone for joining, and thanks to Tom and Ryan, and we will be in touch in the coming days with everyone. So thank you very much.
Thanks all. Cheers.
Thanks.